Okay. We're ready, Mr. Chair.
All right. 7:34. Call this to order. Do a roll call.
Yes. Miss Anthony?
Present.
Miss Bright? Miss Bright, are you having trouble with your audio?
Present. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank you. Miss Dickinson, she let me know she won't be able to join us. Miss Clement, I didn't hear back from her. I don't see her in the meeting. Mr. Kapler, he's not going to be here either. Miss Shaw?
Present.
Mr. Stevie?
I am here. All right.
Okay. Mr. Stevie, we have a quorum.
Great. Do some review and approval of the reports from last meeting. Anyone have any comments, notes, changes? Otherwise, let's get a motion on.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? Otherwise, let's vote. All those in favor, give us an aye or a hands raised.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Feel that motion passes. Maria, let's get those added to the record.
Thank you.
Do a call to the audience. Is there anyone on this call right now that is not directly related to one of the cases on the agenda that would like to have a moment to address the board? Hearing none, Maria, I think we can move on to our first case. SD 423. I know you're moving it. 00042. If I can get a staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, this is a revision from a previously approved design package for the facade renovations for the former Chicago store on the corner of Congress and 6th Avenue. This was reviewed by the DRB back in 2019, and it was and the DRB recommended approval to the PDSD director as presented by the applicant. So the applicant has come back now and is requesting revisions to the original plans that had already been approved. The applicant is here for a presentation. Also, this project has been reviewed last week by the PRS, and they recommended approval as presented by the applicant. Unless there's any questions for me at this point, this is a Rio Nuevo area review. The applicant is ready for a presentation.
I'd say let's go for it.
Bill, I'm gonna stop presenting so you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Everybody can see my screen. So hi, I'm Bill Mackey with Worker Incorporated, architect for 130 East Congress, and basically this is a facade modification to the north storefront just on the first floor, as well as the corner along the east facade. It's a contributing property to the downtown multiple property district. and it's also located in the Rio Nuevo area, which is why we're presenting it to you guys. This is the development zone of the project. You can see it's highlighted in red at the southwest corner of Congress and 6th. And then here's some pictures of the area. Looking at the Chicago store from the Ronstadt Center in shot A, looking up 6th Avenue here, and then some street character along Congress between 6th and Scott. And so this is the area. Basically, it's everything. There's kind of a little cornice here that's wood and metal. And above that is the prismatic glass and the rest of the building. And everything below that line we'll be modifying on the facade, along with the tile on the columns at each end of the building on the north side, on the east and west ends. And then here on the east elevation, we'll be modifying the facade underneath that cornice line with the glass, and then the columns will be the tile will be taken off the columns and replaced with stucco. And so this is the drawing showing the demolition. So if you look at the photos, like number 4 is we're going to be removing all the stone tile floor that was placed there after I believe 1957 or so, when Aaronson's furniture moved in. We'll be removing the ceiling of the alcove, the existing alcove that's there, and we'll be removing all the storefront and all the tile that's within this area. We will also be removing the column covers that are located at the 2 kind of freestanding columns of the alcove, which is number 5. And then you can see the northeast corner will be removing the glass and then the tile at those columns. And what we'll be replacing with is a aluminum storefront system that's being placed on top of a stud wall that has cold rolled steel, bent steel relief on it. And we'll be placing 3 alcoves to the east of the existing doors, which will stay in place, which is in the northwest corner photograph. You can see that number 6. That those doors are going to stay, and then we'll build a new alcove to them. The reason that they are staying is as Congress Street slopes down from 6th to Scott. And so there's really no feasible way to bring the doors up closer with the finished floor level. But with the other doors, it works out just fine. And you can see that the patterning of the facade is, or the vertical kind of divisions are based on the vertical divisions of the existing prismatic glass that's above the cornice. And so we have our door openings placed in between where there's the prismatic glass used to be able to open and kind of have a pivot hinge. And we'll be placing the doors in between those locations. So that's how that rhythm was created. This facade is based on kind of the way the original building was done, more or less, that there was glass out to the street edge. And so we're just bringing it back, and you can see the base has some sort of kind of horizontal. I think there's another picture. The base you can see has some horizontal kind of banding with small vertical bump outs, and we're going to continue that. That PDF doesn't show up well, so here's a close-up of the facade, so you can see the horizontal banding at the base with this little vertical kind of bump out. Now that'll all be done in cold rolled steel, bent plate, or however they end up doing it. And then you can see JCPenney's sometime after 1919, we believe the alcove was created, for people to basically window shop in the off the street edge. And then here it is with as Aaronson's in 1967, and just some Sanborn maps showing you the history of the building. And originally it was just the kind of two bays, and then eventually after 1947 it took over a third bay, and that's when a lot of the facade modifications were happening. The significant period of significance is 1903 to 1957, so 57 is kind of the cutoff date. That's when JCPenney's moved out of the building. And then the Rio Nuevo design standards. Again, the follows a similar pattern to storefronts within the development zone. The storefronts placed at the property edge. There's alcoves. It's huge panes of glass along the facade. There's 4 alcoves along the 100-foot facade, so there's relief. There is some detail at the base, and there will be the vertical mullions. And then the shield from heat and glare isn't totally applicable because it's on the north facade. On the east, it's going to stay as how it was. The color is clear anodized aluminum storefront and cold rolled steel for the base. And then finally, the shade diagram showing the building meets the requirements for the shade just based on its siting more than anything. And that's it. If you have any questions, go for it.
Thanks for that presentation. It was pretty well done. I think I was going to say if you had any materials like mock-ups or what the materials were, I was like, cold rolled steel, we kind of know what that looks like, so there's no real need for that. Anyone else on DRB have questions, comments, concerns?
Hi, it's Rosemary Bright. Thank you, Bill. I think you laid everything out really well for us. And in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense. I think, you stayed with the rhythm of the existing, and you're not changing anything real dramatically. So for me, it looks pretty straightforward, and it looks nice.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Paige Anthony. I agree with the other comments. I have nothing to add.
Hey, Bill. So I'm just wondering, the changes to the facade, it sounds like were made after the period of significance. Is that right? Was that what PRS found as well?
No, they were made during the period of significance. So I think the JCPenney building put the alcove, the JCPenney company put the alcove in at some point. But as you can see in the Sanborn maps, that it probably changed a lot over time. Like in 1909, there was one company here, and that's the picture that we're banking on as like this was the original construction. That's giving us the legitimacy to do this. And that the doors are unknown. It's hard to tell from the photo if there's 2 openings or 1 opening. But then, like in 1919, you can see there's 3 storefronts. And so there was probably some change there. And then in the 1947 Sanborn, after JCPenney's, is in it at this point, it's probably the alcove was probably created at some point, and then so I don't know exactly when that was created, but the storefront, the basic point is the storefront changed a lot over time, just like any other downtown building, and we're just bringing it back to one of the storefronts that was in the period of significance.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I don't have any further questions.
And Mr. Chair, Ms. Shaw, members of the DRB, Jody Brown, our Historic Preservation Officer, is here in case you need to further clarification from her.
Well, just one question, kind of.
Go ahead, Rosemary.
I guess my only question is about the colors of the new facade. I'm not sure that, maybe I'm missing it, but I don't see what colors are going to be used.
So there'll be clear anodized aluminum for the windows, and so that's the color of aluminum. It's and then the base is cold rolled steel, which will be the dark kind of the dark blackish, and then the stucco on the columns has not been called out, but let's see if I have a photograph. It'll match the taupe or the warm gray color of the columns on the facade.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I'd want to open a question up to the rest of the board. Do we want to step through all of our questions like we typically do? It seemed like Bill kind of went through those, and I appreciate that effort too of putting together a little list of our criteria and how you responded to those. So I'm kind of okay with feeling as though those our typical criteria have been discussed. Is there any lighting? Would be the only one. I think there's no change to lighting I see.
Correct. I mean, there'll probably be a soffit light at each alcove, but it'll just be flush with the wood. But no exterior lighting that's shining down on the sidewalk.
Great. Bria, can you pull us back to our kind of official language, the application part? Before we moved into this, I was gonna invite the historic, if there's any comments that would need to be added to this presentation for the historic preservation part, or if we've covered all that.
Jody, can you please kick in?
Yeah, that's pretty much covered. PRS, when they reviewed it, approved it as presented. So I don't think that there's any additional information to add to the motion for you. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other discussion? I'm ready to entertain a motion on this one. Or I'll just make a motion. Maria, you ready? Do we have any, as a board, do we have any other criteria?
No, that's pretty much just the Rio Nuevo area.
I was asking Paige and Grace and Rosemary if they had any additional things they wanted to add as conditions. It didn't sound like we had any.
I do not.
I don't. Well, I'll start the motion here. The design review board has reviewed the applicant's project for compliance with Rio Nuevo area design criteria and recommends the Planning and Development Services Director approval, finding the project in compliance with the building design standards sent forth in UDC section 5.12.7.c 1 through 15 and 5.12.7.d.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none, let's take a vote on that. Yeas?
Yay.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Maria, sounds like we have unanimous on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Who's next? SD 0523-00050. Chase Bank.
Thank you,
Summary.
guys.
Mr. Chair. Oh, thank you, Bill. Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, this is a request to modify the ground floor facades for the existing building at the northeast corner of Stone and Congress. The Chase Bank across the street is going to be moving into this location. So again, this is a Rio Nuevo area review, and Mr. Kevin Spencer, the applicant, is here to present. If you have any questions for me, let me know. Otherwise, Kevin is ready.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So as she said, this is the Chase Bank is going to be moving across the street to this location. This location used to be a U.S. bank back in the day, and so we're pretty much keeping it as the same services, be a bank. And what we're trying to do, what we're looking for approval for is the modification of removing of the existing storefront window at the lower level of the facade that's on the I believe southwest corner there, and fill it in order to check our bank equipment. We're currently proposing to install a exterior walk-up ATM and an exterior walk-up after hours night deposit in this corner. There used to be, when the U.S. Bank was there used to be a ATM on the west side here, but we believe that putting in this location will be a better vision for the customers when they're walking down Congress Street. And on the, so as you can see in our proposed elevation here, this is where we have the ATM machine and the AHD machine. And we are also proposing, in order to install these machines, to remove this bottom window panel as well, in order to create the space, the opening that's we need for both of those machines there. For infilling, and when we are ready, when we infill the window on the stone side of the building, we just want to match the materials that's in the surrounding area and fill it We believe it's ethers. Not sure of the color. We have to color match that when we get to that point of the project. Also looking at the our shade study. There's only like 3 trees that's along stone that will give shade in that area, and with no other additional shading that for that area. And here we're showing the size and the type of ATM facade that they're going to be using when they put their machine in. The color is going to be mostly silver because that's one of their main colors. Their main colors are silver and blue, and this one will be all silver forward. And so yeah, we're not proposing any other major changes or anything like that. And with that, I will open it for questions.
Hey, Kevin, thank you for the presentation. This is Paige Anthony. I do have a question for you regarding the location of the window. I'm wondering why the south elevation was a better option as opposed to the west elevation where there is some shade for part of the day.
Well, we picked that area was chosen because currently there wouldn't be enough clearance room for the ATM on the interior portion of the branch in order to open up, let's say, like the doors or anything like that, in order to service the ATM machine. There's where the existing, where the previous ATM was at. There's like a massive column that's in the way of having the ATM machines doors open and the clearances that's needed in order to service the machines. That's the only reason why we chose this car.
Understood. I guess my only concern is they're very exposed most of the day, and there's no trees or shade provisions.
Understood.
Hi, it's Rosemary Bright. I just want to echo that concern. Yes, for shade purposes and also just glare and just visibility of the ATM. It's very difficult to see when there's, southern sun on the screen. So I think just in terms of maintenance and operation, it seems like another exposure would be better, or perhaps if there's a way to add an awning or something for shade in order to shade that screen and shade the users of the machine.
We can definitely take a look at that at those options to see what would be best suited. We will talk to our client to see if what their thinking is on doing something like that for that, if they're looking to put the ATMs on the phone.
Yeah, to that point, can we look again at the shade study? So I think the criteria is 50%. Is that right, Maria? So just try to see where we're at in comparison to the requirement.
Let me go down to the requirements of the RNA. So the shade for at least 50% of all sidewalks and pedestrian pathways as measured at 2 p.m. on June 21st.
So, and I believe we're showing currently on 12% based on that date and time. There's currently not a lot of shade in the area, on just on a few trees that would be beneficial.
Did you do the shade study taking into account the context? Because there's a large building to the south of this site that may or may not shade that. You know, we would have to look at the actual study.
We did, and the building that's on the south and also on the west at that time and date, unfortunately, does not make it to our building in order to make the shade. It just barely makes it to the curb on both on Stone and Congress.
Understood. I guess maybe this is a question we can defer to Chris on, in terms of what are the landscaping requirements, or what have we enforced in the past in terms of getting from that 12% up to the 50% requirement?
Yeah, we've had some challenges in the past with this requirement, especially on projects very similar to this, where it's kind of a minor modification to a building that's being requested. And there's this sticking point of shade. You're in the downtown corridor. Adding trees along Congress would be the solution, but that's also rife with challenges of visibility, utilities, clearance, getting city, DOT to be on board with adding plant material in there. I would make the assumption that there was availability to put a tree in front of that, or in that area. It may have happened already in the past. So I'm seeing some challenges there of how to get to 50%. Also, personally having a challenge of, is that requirement 50% shade on a building? I don't know. I'm personally, I'm thinking, is that even applicable to this kind of request? They're asking to put an ATM in on a wall of an existing building, no other changes to the use, or to require this project to add street trees and planters, large planters with large trees, or awnings, or anything to get another 40, 38% shade on this sidewalk area is going to be, I would assume, economically not feasible for this project.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Paige's idea that we instead put, the new pedestrian activation where the existing shade is?
I don't really have an opinion on that. I could see an awning or some sort of shade structure projecting from the facade for that. But I think applicant expressed that, your current ATMs right directly across the street, right, Kevin? If you guys are moving across the street, your current ATM is right directly across the street from this. So business wise, I could see that Congress wanting to be the higher profile location. I understand
that's correct.
And from looking at that diagram and looking at this diagram, moving that ATM to the west facade may not even offer shade to that location, considering the street trees are a little bit north of that big blue corner feature. You hear what I'm saying there? I'm not sure that street tree that's existing there on that corner is going to provide shade to that ATM.
No, that makes sense.
It would only be shaded in part of the day.
Yeah, early morning.
Yeah.
Maria, what kind of variability do we have on that shade for projects like this? Do we have a mechanism to have a discussion about that at a
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, yes, the DRB in their motion can decide, to continue this meeting for the applicant to have a chance to explore ways to provide more shade on that south elevation, or the DRB in their motion can recommend the PDSD director approval, considering that, if you feel there's enough evidence that, it's not feasible for the applicant to provide additional shade, in your motion, you can also include that you believe placing the ATM in the south side helps with the, increased pedestrian activity along that side of the building on Congress.
Thank you, Maria. Kevin, I have one other question for you. In front on the Congress side of your building there, is that a loading zone or is that just parking?
It's just parking.
Okay, it's metered parking in that space there?
Yes.
Because I was gonna kind of lead us down the road of, in prior applications where we've had this situation, we've requested some awning and or raised planter with small tree in it, or trellis with a vine or something like that to offset the kind of heat mitigation there. But I'd say with that parking and street facade, I'm not sure there's even availability. I'm not going to give you the job, but the parking's going to limit availability to put a large planter out there with keeping access to the street. There's a large drainage, some utility.
And Mr. Chair, the members of the DRB, that parking at the corner seems to be an ADA parking as well.
It is, right. So they need a little more access. So I'm thinking this site might be a little pinched on space.
I'm noticing that Perry Jewelers does have an awning. So I think it could be complimentary to put an awning over the ATM.
Yeah, even a stock commercial awning that a lot of ATMs have. Kevin, I'm sure your corporate level probably has a standard awning piece that could be added, that would be within your logo and marketing and product requirements.
Yes, they
they
do have something of that sort
Yeah.
that we can explore, to see if that'll be feasible.
Okay.
Just
Jody,
going
did
back
you
to
have
the
something to add?
requirements. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, going back to the requirements, I think it would be difficult to hit that 50%, but I think it would definitely be beneficial to have, some attempt made to create the awning over the ATM, as we've been discussing, and possibly even over that door and window element on the south facade. I don't know if that would be, beyond the scope of this project, but it would definitely help shade the building a bit, if not the pedestrians so much.
It is a pretty stark corner. Kevin, I think this is where we might be heading, is maybe we pause you for a minute and see if you can have discussions with your team and maybe with DOT in this area and see what kind of space is available and what kind of options you have for maybe adding some. I do see a downtown partnership, large container, you know, so maybe there's an opportunity there. I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to ever make it to the 50% just from the, you know, the amount you have to make up, but I'd like to see if you could go and do one level of exploration and see if there, what kind of options you have to even make an attempt at adding some shade or some relief to this corner area. Or would you guys option that for some sort of, for a continuous?
Yeah, we can definitely go back to the client and explore those options to see what their vision is on that, and definitely circle back.
Yeah, I'm not sure an awning attached to the buildings, you know, because the daytime that shade study is required for. I mean, an awning on the building would have to be pretty deep and pretty large to meet that requirement. I'm wondering if it's more of a street, you know, sidewalk level additional plantings or trees or small trees or something that may be available as an option. So my question is back to the DRBs. Am I on the right track here at this line, or?
I think so. I think we might have to continue this one and revisit.
Yeah, because you're really asking for a very, very minor facade change to this building, but I think we would be doing a disservice to the, you know, 12 or 14 items that we need to look at if we didn't ask you to make one more good try effort at seeing what kind of shade modifications you can have before we give relief or, you know, some sort of variance to the level you're at. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Maria, do we need to do a motion to move that to a continuance, or I can't remember how we do that.
Yeah, we do need a motion, Mr. Chair.
Before we get to the motion, I know the previous ATM that we did downtown, there was quite a bit of discussion about the color. Do we want to touch on that so that there's no surprises when they come back?
Seemed like it was more of an industrial kind of silver steel and maybe some blue.
Yeah, that's correct. It's just matching their main colors, which is silver and blue. I think it would kind of complement what the existing color of the facade is.
Maria, was that you who was in Street View there a minute ago? Maybe you could just turn that car around and look at the existing one across the street. I'm sure this will look very similar.
Yeah, that would be similar to what we would be installing on the new building. I should say the new location.
It's already got blue on it. It's got that faded blue. Maybe you give that faded blue a paint job. Does anyone on the DRB have concerns with that color choicing with the existing facade?
I'm not sure how that blue is going to go with that more teal blue. Or gray blue. What is that color?
Actually, I think that blue used to be the same as the blue around that ATM way back in the day. I remember it being way brighter.
So that their new standard has the blue that you see for the existing one. It's been discontinued so where that it's going to be mainly the silver color that you see there. So that blue won't be in a factor in the new location.
Okay. Yeah, I think the silver will be complementary. Or nickel.
Brushed nickel.
Mhm.
We have any other discussion?
It looks like Jody's hand is raised. Jody, did you?
Yeah, I can't see the where I'm at. Okay, yeah, Jody.
Thanks, Grace. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things. Because this is not a historic building that they're going into, PRS doesn't review it. But the building that they're potentially leaving is a significant building with significant interiors. So there are some concerns, and I don't know that that falls under your purview or how you would address that. But when they leave, obviously they're going to take the ATM that is a big hole on the front facade. So the question for me would be how they would repair that. Hopefully that has to get a permit to remove, and then they would come back through both PRS at that point and then DRB to repair that. But the other point is that the interior is not historically designated. I don't know if any of you have been inside of the Chase Bank downtown, but it's got quite nice interior that are original. And because it's not designated, if another tenant comes in, they could gut the interior without any problems, and it would not come through PRS for review if they mainly stayed on the inside. With that being said, we've made contact. I've made contact with Chase, but I haven't heard back about documenting the interior. I have no intent to designate it. I don't have that authority, but it would be nice to at least document it so that information of how it once looked is still available at a later date. So if it's something that you can put in your motion, I'm just throwing out there. If I have no success in hearing back from them, I would much appreciate it. But those are just two things that I'm pointing out because we want to also look at, unfortunately, them leaving the existing Chase Bank.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, yeah, we will need to take care of historic preservation concerns when they remove the current ATM machine here. I just confirmed with the building official that they will require a building permit. And because they will be modifying the exterior of this historic building, they will need to go through Rio Nuevo area review. They will need to go through PRS and the DRB. So at that point, the DRB and the PRS will have the discretion of, recommending the PDST director for that documentation of the interior of the building. But for this building across the street, we do need to focus on this property that is being modified at this point.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, Jody, that is definitely a concern when we get to that other building down the road. That lobby is pretty significant. It's pretty nice inside there. I think we should get a motion going. And Kevin, if it's not going to mess up your timeline too much, I think we need you to take one more stab at shade. And remember, shade is on the sidewalk, not the building. So the way we're measuring it for this criterion. So if you could take a minute and reach out to DOT and find out what kind of things you can do within the right of way, and and work with your team and see if there's any options, and come back and see what you can come up with. I think we would appreciate that as this board. The shade study is a kind of a sticking point we hit a lot on projects, and want to make sure we're doing all our diligence. So if someone on the board can put forward a motion to continue this, I'd appreciate it, since I made the last one.
Do it if you like.
Is that a motion, Rosemary?
Well, no, I think I need the language. Is there a particular language that we need for a continuance?
I don't think so. I think we just make that one up.
So, Maria, do I need to go with this format on the motion for a continuance?
I'm sorry, who was speaking?
Sorry, it's
Ms. Bright?
Rosemary Bright. Yeah, I just wanted to
Yes.
confirm.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Ms. Bright, members of the DRB. Yeah, you can use this language here, the standard language for the motion, or you can also modify it as you feel needed.
Okay. The Design Review Board has reviewed the applicant's project for compliance with Rio Nuevo area design criteria and recommends to the Planning and Development Services Director continuance, finding some need to study the shade on the project and revisit at a later date.
I'll second that motion.
Any discussion? So let's take a vote on that. Those in favor?
Aye.
Say aye for that. Any opposition? Hearing none. Kevin, let's come back and do some diligence on that shade and come back at us as soon as you can, and we'll have another discussion.
Okay, will do. Thank you for your time.
And Kevin, the next DRB meeting is gonna be, and the only one in June is June 16th. I just put in the chat the email of David Marhevka. He's the landscape architect at the Department of Transportation and Mobility. He's the person you need to talk to in terms of, of exploring landscaping, potential landscaping on the sidewalk for this corner.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
I'll reach out to them to discuss.
Thanks for your time, Kevin.
All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Maria, can we move on to the next case?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Members of the DRB, this is an appeal actually for Planning and Development Services Director's decision on a DDO, on a design development option. With us here, we have Nick Ross from PDSD. Nick, you want to take over this case?
Yeah, thank you, Maria, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. So item 6, as Maria mentioned, is an appeal to a design development option decision for a new multifamily development located at 4441 East Bellevue Street. The property owners filed a design development option application with the Development Services Department requesting the zoning approval necessary to allow new 2-story multifamily development to be constructed with reduced setbacks as measured from the south, west, and east property lines. The DDO application was approved by the PDSD director, finding the project in compliance with all required DDO general and specific findings of the Tucson Unified Development Code, section 3.11.1.d.1 and .2. The appellant is requesting reversal of the Planning and Development Services Director's decision to approve case DDO-23-08, which is a request to allow the following design development options. The first being DDO approval to allow a front street perimeter yard setback reduction from 31 feet 3 inches to 13 feet, measured from the building to the south property line. The second is a DDO approval to allow the side perimeter yard setback to be reduced from 14 feet 9 inches to 5 foot 1 inch. The third is a DDO approval to allow the side perimeter yard setback to be reduced from 14 feet 9 inches to 5 foot 1 inch. The fourth is a DDO approval to allow the side perimeter yard setback to be reduced from 10 feet to 1 foot 6 inches. And finally, the fifth is a DDO approval to allow the side perimeter yard setback to be reduced from 10 feet to 1 foot 6 inches. And if it is helpful, I can share my screen, which will depict the development plan showing the site plan. Give me one moment here. All right, and Mr. Chair, we do have the appellant, Ms. Lois Pollock, with us today. If you have any further questions. So I believe your purview is to determine whether or not Planning and Development Services made an error in approving the DDO requests.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, you have the attachment B in the agenda, and basically the DRB has to utilize the same criteria used by the Board of Adjustment when reviewing this case.
And thank you, Maria. And one other thing to add, the DRB's recommendation will be forwarded on ultimately to the Board of Adjustment for final determination.
And we have also here in the meeting today the appellant, Ms. Lois Pollock, present, if you would like to hear from her as well.
I'd say before we go there, our typical purview on this board is the Rio Nuevo work, which we're all fairly familiar with. The criterion that we're looking at, this condition is one I don't have tons of experience on this board, so I'd appreciate if we had what those review, what criteria we're looking at or need to be reviewing for.
Yes, I can get that for you. One second, Mr. Chair. So we are looking at the findings for approval, section 3.11.1D and 1 and 2. So it would be these starting with D, 1 listing A through J, and then 2A through F.
So if you guys could remind this board the process that this project has followed previously to get to the DDO, it has not come through this body prior, has it?
It has not.
So my understanding was that they would put in a traditional development plan. They had some comments or denials and they went for the DDO option process and they followed that process through and had an approval. At this time, there's been a resident that is objecting to that approval.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Is there any documentation or previous objections during that DTO process that are applicable to this process we're in now? As in, what I'm asking is this objection been already heard and during the DDO process?
So, Mr. Chair, we did receive the letter of opposition from Ms. Pollock during the appropriate DDO process period, which we did consider their objections and ultimately still made the decision to approve the request.
Can we see the rest of this letter?
So Maria, within the, I guess the ideas of what we're looking at now is these responses to the sections that have been provided by the applicant to this process. We need to make the determination whether or not the DDO had an error
This
in
is
their findings that this project met these criteria, correct?
this letter I'm displaying on the screen right now, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, is the appeal application filed by Ms. Lois Pollack on behalf of the Garden District Neighborhood Association. And yeah, she's, you know, listing the different sections applicable from the UDC and her response of, you know, the DDO approval.
Correct. Yeah, I read through this letter last night. There's definitely some, I think, some valid points in here, especially around the definition of minor and how that is being presented towards setbacks. And I think that's the question I'm probably going to focus on. I think I saw Rosemary raise her hand. Rosemary?
Yes, I was just curious, what was the public engagement process leading up to this application on the developer's part? Do we know anything about how they engaged the adjacent neighborhood?
Thank you, Ms. Bright. So we do our standard mail out for all DDO requests, which is to adjacent property owners and the neighborhood association. This is all a mail out, and it gives the neighborhood and the adjacent property owners the, sorry, I have an upset baby that I'm dealing with right now. It gives them the opportunity to submit in written form any opposition to the proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Well, okay, I guess let's move into this. I want to keep this discussion, if we can, to the criteria that we're looking at and the definitions of what those criteria are and how it was applied to this case. I think the variances, I'll be a little opinionated, variances I think are tough sometimes because there is usually a development services process or code review is there's less subjectivity to it, and it's pretty black and white. Did you meet the criteria or not? When you start asking for variances and for relief, that's when it becomes there's some subjective thought to it of yes, we allow that to happen because of these other things. But I'd like to see within this, is there any backup data? I think what we were just looking at, is there any backup data or their decision? I didn't see that part when I went through this last night of the board's decision-making policy in granting these variances, that why they felt that they were appropriate or applicable to still be approved versus saying disproving or disallowing it based on just the straight code section. Is there any verbiage on that of a reason behind the allowance of the variance request?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify, this is not a variance request. This is a design development option, which is an administrative approval. So
Correct.
Right.
Thanks,
So
thank you for correcting my terminology.
Yeah. And so the reason that that's important is there is no board that actually reviews the responses. It is an internal determination from the PDSD director that makes those findings. So I apologize. I do not have anything in writing to present to you or the board today based on why it was approved. I will say in the decision notice, based on some of the comments from the opposition, we did create a condition for the DDO decision to have all outdoor lighting to be pointed directing away from any adjacent residences. So that was one condition made based on what was presented in the DDO request. And additionally, you'll see item 3 is there would be a fire rating requirement as well due to the nearby location of the wall itself.
Any discussion items from DRB?
I'm just wondering, are we going to be looking at the different sections and the responses the appellant provided?
I would think so.
Okay.
One other point I just want to make, the drawing set doesn't really show the condition of what's happening to the property directly to the east of this property. But looking at it, there are buildings that are very close to that lot line, and I think that needs to kind of be addressed when you have this 1-foot-6-inch setback approved along the east side of the property. Yes, there would be a fire rating requirement, but even so, thinking about visibility and thinking about privacy and all these other concerns, that this building would be very close to existing buildings that are on these properties to the east.
One other item for the board to consider is if you look at the site plan, the 1-foot-6-inch setback is for the patio. The actual structure of the multifamily units themselves are the 5-foot-1-inch setback. So there is a little bit of a buffer there between the building itself and the property line, but the patios are what is getting 1 foot 6 inches away from the property line.
So that still sounds like building facade is plus or minus 5 feet from property line.
Correct.
As opposed to the required setback is 13 something on that east side.
It would be 14 feet 9 inches.
14.9 down to 5. So we're doing a more than 50% reduction on that. And on the west side, it's even more severe.
The west and the east side are the same.
I think it was the south side that was more severe.
The south side was a requirement of 31 feet 3 inches down to 13 feet. One thing to consider on that is we have since had a code change that the applicant for this development package could pursue. The code change has reduced setbacks for streets. It is now down to 20 feet. So that reduction is a little less intense than what it appears from the 31.3. It would now be 20 feet if they so choose to use the new code.
Got it. Thank you.
So being the landscape guy that I am, I'm going to ask the next question. Was there any reduction to the front 10-foot landscape border? I don't remember seeing any reductions in that. They're maintaining that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. We actually added that as a condition as well. they will need to comply with all lot coverage and landscape requirements, which would include a 10-foot landscape buffer on the front street side there.
There's no landscape requirement along the side, that 1 foot 6 inch?
I apologize. I am not a landscape reviewer. I can check with our staff who would be able to answer that question better than I. I believe there would be a requirement if there is single family residential adjacent to multifamily, but I would want to double check that. I believe it's multifamily to the west, but single family to the east and potentially the north side. Maria, if you don't mind, could you pull up the aerial one more time? Okay, so it looks like it's multifamily on the north side as well, but it's single family immediately to the east there towards Bellevue.
So does that perimeter yard waiver include a waiver of this landscape requirements, or it sounds like it does not?
All landscaping will be required based on that condition. So if that means that the applicant would need to modify their building footprint or setback requirement, they would need to do that.
Lois is clarifying in the chat that it's multifamily on all sides.
For the board's clarification, multifamily for the city of Tucson is 3 units or more. And I believe the unit to the immediately east is 2 units.
Is there a mechanism to sort of hash that out and make sure that the footprint is consistent with the landscape requirements, or does this DDO approval constitute approval of that site plan, I guess is the question.
So just process wise, when the applicant moves forward with their development plan, they will need to show compliance with all landscape requirements. So we would not be approving from zoning any development plan that does not show a compliant landscape plan as well. So if there is a requirement to have a buffer along any multifamily or single family adjacent property owners, they would need to show that and comply with that. And if that means changing the footprint of their buildings, they would need to do that as well.
Okay, got it.
I think I'd like to open this up and allow the applicant a few minutes to not necessarily go point by point, but if there's any, I guess, highlights or main concerns. We have the written appeal in front of us. So I don't know if we need to go through them, all of that word for it, but I want to give you a time to speak and put your voice into this conversation at this time.
Great. I'm Lois Pollock, and thank you very much for letting me put in some information maybe about what the neighborhood is thinking. So I represent the Garden District neighborhood. We're 1 square mile of a neighborhood association, not an HOA. We are very concerned here about protecting and promoting the general health, safety, welfare of all present and future residents. And that is the reason why we are appealing this decision. It's not because we are in favor of infill, but it needs to be consistent and with the area, and it also needs to be meeting the requirements that were intended in the code. And so the biggest things, as I mentioned, is health, safety, welfare. These reduced setbacks are potentially endangering people from fire, from flooding. This is a FEMA flood zone. This property is surrounded on one, so there's one block that this is in. On one side of it, on Catalina Avenue, that's a huge flood area that comes from south of Speedway and just runs on through all the way down to the Rideau. On the east side, it's another midway wash that runs all the way from south of, who knows where it starts, all the way also goes to the Rideau. We're very concerned about, the fire and safety and everything is one thing. The FEMA flooding in there is a big problem. I drove through there just the other day, and in 1/10 of an inch of rain, it's a river bank to bank on both those streets. Now, this property, we're not understanding why the property needs to be developed with the reduced setbacks. Everybody in the area, or I'd say 90% of everyone in the area for blocks and blocks has met the setback requirements, and this one is going to stick out like a, it'll be the non-conforming property. And so, there's nothing in the code that says people should be allowed to build more on the property than what you normally would be able to build just because you can. And so, or just because the city allowed you, because everyone else has pretty much met the codes. Now, this lot is rectangular. There's nothing unusual about it. When it rains, it soaks up 100% of the water. But when it's going to be covered with the proposed building, what we've seen in the plans so far, we're very worried about how it's going to impact all the properties surrounding. Now, on the west side, that's a complex of 6 single-story apartments, and they've got their setback there, but that's a driveway, and this building will now be its front window. On the north side, that is a multi-complex that encompasses that whole half a block. And that currently, from what I understand, the lot slopes that way. So if there was more water heading off towards the north, it would probably be impacting those. Now to the east side, there's actually 3 separate parcels. One has an entry on Bellevue, 2 have entries on Belvedere. And I know for a fact that the one in the middle on Belvedere is multifamily. It's all apartments and things like that. The one directly that faces Bellevue, there are multiple homes on that lot. Everything's R2 in this area, and that can be that way. So basically, we're happy with the fact that somebody's developing it, but they appear to have very large units. The units are then infringing on the amount of space you need in order for the setbacks. And we just aren't understanding, honestly, about why that's required. If the units were a little bit smaller, if they didn't have a porch, it'd be different. But when you look at the amount of setback that they are taking away from the requirements, 1 foot 6 inches, yes, those are just the patios, but then you're looking at 5 feet instead of 10 or 12. All around they got themselves another, 20% or something. Even when you look at the PAL, so when you drive down the road into the complex, that road was reduced from the standard, the required 24 feet to 21 feet wide, from what we can tell from these plans. And then when you go to the PAL on the northeast end of it, there seems to be no no setback there at all. It's built right up to the property line. And so we're just not understanding from the drawings. You can't even read the numbers on the buildings to see exactly what size they are. But it looks to us like they're 2,100 square feet. And, you know, but again, we don't care about the building size or whatever. We care about the setbacks, the proper egress in there for fire trucks. There's not going to be any firefighting capability on these easement areas. So without these proper setbacks, we're very worried about that. Without proper setbacks, we're worried about water flow. Where's it all going? It can't dump out onto Bellevue. It's just going to increase the amount of water in these two flood zones that surround it. Now, we know by looking at the history of the property through the city, whatever we could see in pro and pull up in there, it appears the property's been bought and sold at least a couple of times, that somebody tried to submit some plans, but then it looked like they just backed out of it and said, okay, it's not doable. So they sold the property again. And so this is a piece of undeveloped, never been developed property as far as I know, unless it was years and years ago. So that's basically our, view. We don't want to, one property owner should not be able to take away from the value of adjacent property owners by making their project bigger and better or whatever than adjacent properties. It needs to be consistent as far as the amount of land it takes up on the lot, and it needs to look like it fits in. This property will not look like it fits in. It will be bigger than everybody else, and that's very concerning because it sets a precedent for somebody else to do the same thing, and it just doesn't make any sense in here. So anyhow, we really just aren't understanding it. And because the DDO process, because the city doesn't have to provide, they do not have to involve residents in the process. Their involvement, as Nick said, was they send out a letter to the people within 100 feet. Well, that's only surrounding property owners, most of which are out-of-town landlords. So they really don't care. The only people, there was one other letter, which he didn't show you, and he didn't show you my letter, actually, that we wrote during this DDO process before the decision was made. He just showed you the letter I wrote after the decision. There was myself as the neighborhood association and the property owner adjacent to the lot to the east. They wrote a letter also objecting to this development. So then I contacted the city, okay, let us see what process you went through or your notes on how you approved it. And as Nick stated, they don't have any because their policy at the city says we don't have to do that. So now as the appellant, I can't figure out how they approved it, why they approved it. I can just go by what they told me they have to follow, and which is consistent with, the code. But it appears they just didn't follow that. They didn't look for those requirements to be met. The county, now I know we're in the county, but we're not the county. The county follows their code very strictly. It's the same code, and they will reject things based on the fact that they don't have the setbacks they're supposed to and things like that. But so again, we're very worried about the flooding, FEMA flood zones. We are in a flood zone. There's not going to be any solution to that in the next who knows how long. We think that people will be directly affected by things like, if there's a fire. Well, and additionally, if there's a fire in these older properties, those people in that new development aren't going to be isolated from a fire. So I don't care how thick you make the wall in the building, they're still going to be affected by that. And as I said, so the reduced setbacks everywhere, very concerning. We're not understanding why. And we don't think that they're a good thing for the new residents or the existing ones. So that's basically, that's basically our issues. Now we do know there's been a couple of other decisions made in the last few years in the city that have impacted. They're the same types of things. You got the Mountain Enclave, which is Mountain View neighborhood near First and Mountain. They developed, a bunch of units on just 8 acres. The drainage report was done.
Lois, I'm
However,
gonna cut you off on that. Those aren't relevant.
Yeah,
to
no
this
problem.
conversation.
Yeah, no problem. It's just
And
that
you're
we
starting
need
to
to consider, we need to
bring
consider the
projects into the
drainage.
mix that I worked on, so I don't want to have to recuse myself.
Oh, yeah,
we
yeah.
could limit the conversation about some of the projects.
Just about the drainage.
Yeah, yes, I understand. I think I got your concerns and the overview of kind of where your position's looking at, or where your neighborhood and adjacent neighbors that you're representing are putting forward, and I think they're in my opinion valid concerns to discuss. So we'll have a discussion about those as we move forward here. DRB, do we have any discussion points internally based on what we just heard?
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, the floodplain concerns and the fire protection will be part of the development package review, right? The DDO doesn't preclude them from complying with those requirements.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, that's correct.
I think one of the criteria of approval of the DDO that they have an additional 1 hour firewall, which on the east and west sides, which wouldn't have been necessarily code required.
Correct.
Maria, if you're in control of the screen, can you get back to street view? I have one point I want to bring up to the board that I saw when we were looking at, not the actual street, the straight down plan view of aerial. If you could zoom in on the multifamilies east of Belvedere on Bellevue, kind of to the right hand side of the screen. Scroll right. Yeah, those there. I'm seeing precedent in the neighborhood of this density and setback value. I know that it's not necessarily in our purview, but I wanted to just put that in front of the board. Of just down the street, looks like there's a couple larger multifamilies that probably carry similar density, scaling, and design makeup of the current property we're discussing.
Chris, I saw that too. I think the main difference is there aren't porches, which create that 1.5 foot buffer or setback.
Right, and they're not really into actual development plans yet. So one thought I was having is, what's the materiality of that porch? Is that just an offset space, or is it actually enclosed? It kind of had a graphic representation that looks like there's some enclosure around each of those. That 1'6" space between fence lines is a concern of mine. Nick, I saw you had your hand up. Or is that not there anymore?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to point out too, when PDSD was making the decision on this, we were looking at the properties just south of this site as well, which did set a precedent for multifamily with reduced setbacks. So just wanted to point that out to the board as well.
Oh, those are intended to full on have roof enclosures.
Yeah.
Yeah, members of the board, the patios will have a post and a roof covering them.
All draining down to an 18-inch offset to a fence line on a neighbor's property.
And a 6-foot wall.
It's tough.
Yeah, I had a question about that page. And maybe I just missed it. Did you see that the wall goes all the way around the property? That
Mhm.
6-foot masonry wall? Oh, okay.
My understanding of the plans, I had to really zoom in to see it, but it looks like there's a wall that goes around the whole development. So basically, it's a porch and about a foot plus, and then a wall. And the porch covers the majority of the buffer or the setback.
I had another question for Nick. Are they going to need to do the TSMR or the PDMR for that PAL reduction separately, or is that included here?
Thanks, Grace. I apologize. I don't know where they are in their review of that. I don't know if that had been a comment that was left that they need to address. Still, they can reduce that down. 20 feet is the minimum requirement for a two-way access lane. So that would be an administrative approval. I don't know if that has been granted or if that has been requested as a TSMR to date, though. I apologize. Adding to that, though, Tucson Fire will be a reviewer in this development plan. So if there's any issues with ingress, egress, and the turnaround for fire there, that will be something that will need to be addressed.
Looking at the development plan review comments, it seems like there's quite a bit of things that have not yet been addressed by the design team. But is this the neighborhood's only opportunity really to object? It just seems like there's a lot still up in the air in terms of the final design.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. For the request to reduce setbacks, yes, this is the neighborhood's opportunity to oppose their request. And to add to that, if the applicant, as they continue to develop their site plan and things change, if there is a reduction greater than what is being has already been previously decided on, they will be required to have another DDO.
So my understanding is that this DDO request must meet all of the following findings. And I, looking through those last night, I guess the point F under section 3.11 or 3.11.1.d.1, I don't understand how it meets that, and I thought maybe it would be good to discuss that. The modification applies to properties that cannot be developed in conformity with the provisions of this chapter due to physical circumstances or conditions of the property, such as irregular shape, narrowness of lot, exceptional topographic conditions. And as is obvious from the maps and street view and whatnot, it is a pretty standard lot size, not exceptional really in any way. So I'm wondering how this meets that.
Yeah, that was my concern too, looking at this page, was the concern of there's nothing irregular or outside of the development idea or proposed development forcing their hand, right? Other than maximizing square foot and units. I don't see a remedy for F, in my opinion.
Nick, do you have a response for that?
Yeah, so the the irregular shape is just an example of what F can really mean, right? So the way that we were viewing F is that this site density wise can support up to 12 units, which is what the applicant is intending to pursue. And due to even though it is a rectangle, due to the requirements of a street width, minimum sizes for parking spaces to the units themselves, it would be very difficult to maximize what is by right a 12 unit parcel without reducing the setbacks.
Is there a requirement of those 12 units to have a certain square footage?
There is no requirement for square footage of the units.
That brings us right back to F, that this is a condition brought by owner that they are trying to put X square feet of each unit. If there was a reduction or size or scale of square foot, the site could be developable up to 12 units.
I want to echo what you're saying there, and I also want to point out letter J, where it says it does not create a situation where the development will result in an increase in the number of units or square footage than would occur if it were built without the modification. I feel like what they're trying to do is double load a situation that could really generously accommodate, a single loaded property and fewer units of larger square footage. But I think, when you reduce the PAL and you reduce all the setbacks, we're definitely creating a situation with more units than the property can realistically accommodate within the code. Been reviewed by floodplain. Has the drainage been reviewed?
There are a bunch of comments in the development package from floodplain that they haven't not yet been addressed, it looks like.
I generally have some concerns with those east and west property lines. With the condition that we were talking about earlier with Paige about from property line, they have probably a slight kickback for footer, a masonry wall taking up, I'd say, a high percentage, if not more than half of that 1'6" setback. With the posts, that it's creating a very, very close condition in that space. I've concerns about egress, safety, drainage onto neighboring property, visibility into the neighboring properties. I feel that 1'6" setback is kind of tight, considering there's other features going into that 1'6" space.
In this process, is there an opportunity to request additional information from the original applicant in terms of seeing, like you're saying, a site section to understand what that 1'6" really looks like, or that's not part of this process?
Members of the board, I suppose you could request that. I know, so again, the DRB's kind of role in this appeal is to provide a so I'm drawing a blank on the word, provide a recommendation, sorry, to the Board of Adjustment for ultimate consideration. So whatever you need to make that determination, I think would be acceptable. We do have a tentatively scheduled Board of Adjustment date scheduled, though, so I don't know what that does to the timeline.
Nick, when is the Board of Adjustment meeting scheduled for?
Let me confirm that. One moment.
Maria, can you go back to the plan view that shows the offset or shows those setbacks dimensions?
Oh, the site plan.
Yes.
June 28th is the date of the Board of Adjustment.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, the next DRB meeting is for June 16th. We can also include the applicant for this development be present at the next DRB meeting.
Nick, can you confirm that 1'6" setback, is that to the post of these patios or is it to the overhang of the overhead structure?
It would be to the post.
So this 1'6" setback, we have a 1 foot eave overhanging into this and a masonry wall. It's to the back of the post even in this that dimension I'm seeing there, or is that might just be a misread on?
Yeah, it would
have
be
to be
to the
front,
face.
right?
It would be to the face of the post. Correct.
Right on. And Maria, they had some cross sections through the building that were showing those overhangs that I was concerned about. I know there is a provision, Nick, if you could speak to that, of what can go into that setback. Is there, for the eaves of those patio covers, there's a, I remember there's language within the code that allows things to hang into an offset.
There is, and if my memory serves me correctly, it's 2 feet can stick out into a setback requirement. Obviously, they don't even have that to their property line, so that would not be acceptable. But it does appear that they are showing there in their plans, there is a bit of an overhang there from the post.
What about the pad of the patio porch?
That's going to stick into it too, Paige.
Yeah.
But that's a ground level. That wouldn't necessarily be part of a setback. It's usually to the facade face of whatever the first vertical element is. My concern is if you scroll up to the elevation above where you're at currently, Maria, is that dimension on this eave. This is showing a 1 foot dimension from, or is that on the garage side? Oh, that I was reading that wrong. Sorry, that's on the street, the Powell side. Thought I saw that dimension earlier. This doesn't dimension how far that overhang is. Doesn't look like it's more than the concrete. So, okay, I was going in the wrong direction there. All right. I'd ask you, can we go back to the technical language of what our options are? Thought there was a list of like 5 things or 4 things. I don't have that.
Mr. Chair, do you mean the DDO approval or?
There was another list of what our recommendations could be. It's either
Oh, okay,
I
the
thought it was
purview.
send it
Okay.
back, say yes or no, or yes, this list. Wanted to see what these are the 5 things that were part of the DDO. Fourteen to 5, 10 to 1.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, the DDO request 1 through 3, those are for the buildings themselves, and 4 and 5 are just for the porches.
All right, let's go over to our criteria that we have to look at within these 5. I'm hearing from our discussion that we have some challenges with F and J at least.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris.
So Maria and Nick, could you give me a little insight of the process from here if we make a recommendation? Does it send let's hypothetically, if we make a recommendation that we don't feel like we meet F and J, it goes to zoning, they send it back to development services for another round, or what's the course of action
Right.
post
So,
our decision?
Mr. Chair, your recommendation will be forwarded to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment will make the final call on the appeal itself. I will also point out a DDO request with multiple setback reductions. It's not an all or nothing approval. If you have issues with certain setback reductions and not others, you can identify that in your recommendation. If the patios are the main concern, you can identify that. But ultimately, your recommendation will be forwarded to the Board of Adjustment for the final call.
So others on the DRB, personally, my concerns with this are the patios. The overhang or the enclosed structure of them visually and, kind of, I don't know, I want to say physiologically, the view of that from a neighboring property would make me feel like I'm more impinged than I really am with the setback of the building facade. I have some concerns about safety and access to that space and drainage. The 5-foot setback from the building from property, granted it's 2 stories, looking down into these properties is potentially also a concern of mine on the east side, not necessarily on the west side.
I agree with that. I think letter G would also come into play here with respect to that. I think, having upper level bedrooms looking down into neighboring yards from less than 5 feet away, from a 2-story new property looking down into single story is not ideal.
I think my more concern with that notion on the east side is that those appear to be, even though it's R2, it seems like it's been developed in a single family style versus a multifamily style on the west side. Exacerbates that condition for me. Nick, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I will point out they have removed the windows on the second story of both the east and west facades. So there is no privacy issue that we determined in that scenario.
Right, thanks for that comment. So they're building second story prisons.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Or they can look into the drive to the PAL and at each other.
Sure. They're meeting egress and light code, I would assume, or at least they're going to, unless that's one of the comments within the development services so far. I don't know. My gut's saying I want to kick this one back for someone to look at again, or to have another swing at it. Like, those patios are bothering me. What do you guys think?
I would support that.
I think especially looking at, for me, a letter J, I don't think this configuration would be possible without, all the variances that have been applied to this thing. It would have to be a single loaded configuration if we complied with setbacks and the width of the required PAL.
Yeah, I agree. Just so some things is allowable up to 12 units doesn't mean it's actually physically available to accept 12 units. And I think that's what Jay is working on, right?
Exactly.
So I'd like to figure out how we word a response. I think has everyone on the DRB had a chance to speak their thoughts on this? Is there anyone holding ideas before we start moving into next rounds of topic?
Yeah, I just wonder if the front setback that they're getting, the street yard setback, it seems like they do have plenty of space behind, and I imagine that's going to be a retention issue down the line if they don't get it, but we don't have documentation of that, so I just wonder what the rationale for that, pushing the building back so far from the, or pulling it towards the street so far, when we have the space out back.
Well, it's probably to get that hammerhead in with the turning radiuses.
Yeah, and if I can add, I'm looking at their grading plan as well. They have 8-inch deep landscape area in those areas as well for water harvesting and drainage.
I believe is that what the plan is for the for Bellevue Street for the front buffer as well, because it says it's rainwater harvesting there.
Does
So
that
Chris,
say 8 foot? Does that say 8 feet landscape on that front? I can't zoom in close enough.
5, I think.
5? Is that part of this DDO? Is reducing the front landscape border from a required 10 feet to 5 feet?
No, it is not. Mr. Chair, I believe what they're showing.
Oh,
trying
that's
to
5
zoom.
feet within the property. That's within the right of way.
Exactly. I believe that's what they're
Okay.
they're intending to do, which is allowable.
Yes, yes. I was trying to see what dash line they were clicking onto there. It's not a property line type, so it was confusing me. It's a tough one. I guess let's discuss any motion we'd like to entertain and do here. We can start mocking up some language and figure out what we want to put on this. I kind of want someone to explore these patios and the setback again on the patio ones. The building ones, if they're taking that upper windows out, don't concern me as much. It's tight, but
And so, Mr. Chair, if I may, I will just like to remind the board, a decision has already been made on this, right? So this is an appeal. So a redesign is not appropriate at this point. What we're looking at today is purely based on the decision that's already been made. So your recommendation would be going to the Board of Adjustment, whether or not that decision was appropriate, or if it was not. And if it was not, if the entire request was inappropriately approved, or if a portion of it was, such as the patios.
correct. But ultimately, Nick, in my mind, that would ultimately trigger this client to go back and reevaluate their design and bring new ideas forward to this process, right?
I would
Or
need to
not do the project, whatever. It'd be in their court, but ultimately it'd be telling them that they need to go back and relook at what they're asking for relief.
Right. I would need to look at the code. I believe an overturned DDO decision, though, would force them into a variance. So it would not be the same process.
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting turn of events. That end of that process, that just pushes them back into another public comment and the traditional variance process, right? Which has a little more vigor.
One other thing, they could potentially pursue a DDO after 1 year. Once again, I need to probably double check that before I put that on record.
I'm looking at the language here, and it does offer modify the director's decision, but it sounds like, Nicholas, that you're saying that it's really more of a uphold or a reverse situation, or am I misunderstanding your comment?
No, you're correct. A modification can be presented, such as the The decision currently is to approve all requests. A modification could be approval of the building reduction, but not the patio reduction.
Okay, thank you.
Thinking architecturally on that though, if we said we were okay with the front and rear rejections, but not the side, and they removed the patios, and that was the only thing they changed about the design, I don't think that improves the project as a whole for the folks who would be living there. For me, the idea is more holistic, that they're trying to squeeze 12 units into a property that realistically can't accommodate unless these reductions are made. Goes back to letter J.
Yeah, I think to Rosemary's point, if they had done something different with the parking or with the garages, or, there are ways that they could pull away from the property line probably, and just, or you had mentioned not double loading it, maybe like the property next door doing a loop around to avoid this hammerhead at the back. I think there are options to get us back to 12 units if that's what they want.
Agreed. I do feel like there's a lot of space dedicated to vehicles. There's a little house for the vehicles, there's parking for the vehicles, there's a PAL for the vehicles.
Nick, they're providing the minimum parking required. They're
Correct.
not exceeding that, correct? Okay. So, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, if the DRB pleases to go through each one of these criteria, and that help you formulate your motion for today.
I agree with that. Let's put these at least on paper so we know where we stand on each of these. I'll run through them real quickly. This request has not previously been denied by a variance, as a variance. We get verification of that. We meet that criteria.
It has not been previously denied as a variance, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. This does not modify a conditional requirement or finding to determine whether the use should be allowed in the zone. The use of this property and this property is allowed within this zone. They're not asking for a change of use. Correct.
That is correct.
It is not a condition of approval for a rezoning or special exemption land use application. That sounds, we're meeting that criteria. They're not using a FLD or anything like that, are they?
Nope. No.
they probably should have, would have allowed them some flexibility, I think. It's inherent in the name. Where are we at? C, does not modify requirement of an overlay zone, such as or not limited to scenic corridor, environmental resource, major streets, or airport. There's no special overlay district in this area.
There is not.
Right on. E, does not result in a deletion or waiver of a UDC requirement. I don't think we're doing any of that.
No, they are not.
This modification applies to a property that cannot be developed in conformity with the provisions of this chapter due to physical circumstances or conditions of the property, irregular shape, narrowness, exceptional topographic or location. This is one that we're having challenges with.
Agreed.
If we keep notes on this, the challenges we're having with this is that the lot itself within its zoning allows this type of development. It allows a higher density of this development, right? But the physical appearance or shape of this and utility easements or anything like that are not the criteria that is triggering this request or these modifications. Is that our thoughts on that? It's not necessarily the shape or size of the lot.
Correct. It's a very regular shape. It's not exceptionally narrow. I think it's just a matter of designing to the constraints.
Correct. It's not an abnormal size lot for the area. It seems to be, at least in conformance, or it's the lot's proximity to it are equally or within reason sizing and shape. There's nothing really unique about this piece of property that's creating this condition.
Agreed.
Let's do, so that's one we put a little star next to. G, does not create a situation where proposed development substantially reduces the amount of privacy that would be enjoyed by nearby residents any more than would be available if the development was built without this modification. With a perimeter wall around the outside and the removal of second-story windows, I'm thinking they might be able to skim by on this one. In my opinion, I don't think a 5-foot patio back there at pedestrian level, whether it's 5 feet or 13 feet, if you're just sitting in your back patio there, reduces or increases privacy to the neighboring properties.
Agreed.
Any other comments? H, does not create a situation where proposed development will block visibility within the required visibility triangle or adjoining streets or vehicular pedestrian traffic. They meet that one. Does not create a situation where proposed development will cause objectionable noise, odors, trespass lighting, or similar adverse impacts adjacent to the properties of development. I think within the criteria provided of this DDO approval, the lighting had a condition that remedied I.
Yeah, I believe so.
Had shielding or glare reduction. That's an easy one to meet anyway, just with the outdoor lighting codes we have currently in this jurisdiction. And J, does not create a situation where development will result in increase in the number of residential dwelling units or square footage of non-residential buildings greater than what would occur if the development was built without the modification? This is one we're having a challenge with, right?
Yes.
So let's break down what this actually means. This means that the property allows 12 units, correct, Nick, per zoning and use. They're allowed to put 12 dwelling units on this property.
Correct.
But within the
It seems that the modification's allowing a greater square footage.
potentially, yes.
Without the modification, they would be smaller units.
They would either be smaller or there would be fewer of them, and they could be larger, you know, fewer units that were each larger, but because of the modifications, they're able to do this double loaded configuration that seems to be stressing the property.
Nick, here's a question we haven't looked at yet. Is there a height limit that they are under or could go further on this, within this zoning, within this properties?
Yeah, so this is an R2 lot, so the maximum height is 25 feet. So they're not going to be able to go, I mean, I don't think they're at 25 feet, but if they were to propose higher, it wouldn't gain them any additional living space.
Correct. That was the clarification I just wanted to put on record. We can't tell them they could do smaller but higher. That's or you know, that's not an option here.
Yeah, I would agree with Paige that what they're gaining here is additional square footage, not additional units. But the way that this is phrased, I don't know if that's in violation or not. The square footage only pertains to non-residential building.
Oh, I didn't see that. Thanks for calling that out, Grace. Or, is that Grace?
I would argue that they are actually gaining additional units that they couldn't gain if not for the reduced setbacks that are being allowed and the reduced width of the PAL.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, yeah, I believe that second portion of J applies for non-residential buildings.
Yes, sheds, auxiliary structures, things of that nature, right, Maria?
Correct.
There's no wood shops being put on this property.
True, but if we required the traditional setbacks for this lot and required the 24-foot PAL, they would not be able to get 12 units, is my point.
Correct.
So the first part of that doesn't apply here. That's the part I'm struggling with.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I would like to just point out the reduction of the PAL width is a by right reduction and should not be considered part of this DDO appeal.
However, the side yard modifications are definitely come into play.
All the setback reductions. If they aren't able to push towards the street more, they can't get that hammerhead in the back, you know, so there's reasons those are being pushed to get these number of units in here.
Right.
Wall height modification requests. Look through
I'm
these
sorry,
real
Mr.
quick.
Chair, what was the question?
Oh, I'm just looking at this next section on what it is. It's
Oh,
for
okay.
setback and wall height modification requests. I don't know if we're doing, is there something that falls under this criteria? It's directly under the requested DDO?
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, I believe, is for the setback portion. They're not requesting wall height modifications. So
changes,
this
right?
section D2 would apply just for the setbacks.
All right, let's run through these real quick. This does not create a situation for proposed development, will obstruct significant views, landforms, vegetation, and parks from nearby properties. I'm not aware, it's not been pointed out that there are substantial views or view sheds or stands of vegetation within the area. B, provides design alternatives to better integrate the development into the design character of the immediate neighborhood. I think that's one that at least this appeal is moving towards having issues with, that this building development does not fit the character of the directly adjacent neighborhood. How do we feel about that one, board?
Agree, the density is greater in what they're proposing than what the adjacent neighborhood shows.
For single family homes, there are apartment buildings directly across the street.
And one block east, but I don't know if we can go that far block east if we're talking about adjacent. All right.
Nick, does the UDC define what adjacency means? How many feet?
I believe it does, but I think this standard actually relates more to the neighborhood as a whole, rather than the true immediate neighbors. It's referring to the actual neighborhood that this is locating in.
Yeah, my reading of that one would be like if there were prevailing setbacks that we're adjusting to meet or something to better integrate into the neighborhood. I don't know that they're making design decisions that are preferable necessarily in terms of the neighborhood character.
Correct. That's the way I read that too, is that they're not necessarily making design decisions to better fit the neighborhood. I think they're not making design decisions to not fit the neighborhood, but they're not doing anything extra to within this request within the DDO modifications to the that they're asking for aren't explicitly doing revisions to fit better in the neighborhood. They're so we're kind of moot on this point. They are not using an FLD, correct, Nick? You made that statement earlier.
Correct.
D, does not create a situation where the proposed development will interfere with the optimum air, temperature, solar radiation orientation of the buildings of adjoining properties. Substantially more that would occur if the building or structures were built without the modification. I wouldn't say these structures are impacting solar or air circulation necessarily. E, does not create a situation where proposed use of property will impose objectionable noise levels on adjoining properties greater than would occur if the building or structures were built without the modifications. I don't know if that would be. I don't think there's, whether they're 13 feet or 5 feet away is going to increase sound. And F, modification is not for an increase in height of more than 2 feet of wall or fence. There's no fencing modifications being requested as part of this DDO, so I don't think F applies.
Good.
So in summary, we had, can you scroll up to the, I don't think we had any in this 311-1D2. We didn't have any, we didn't see anything we had any challenges with, or am I misreading? I don't think we had anything in here. Let's revisit the ones we had challenges with. So we had F, G, and J, but we are corrected where G is the upper story windows are no longer included in the development. So do we have consensus that G is, that the setbacks aren't necessarily impacting letter G?
That's true, but looking at the overall design, which may or may not be our purview here, removing those windows doesn't create a better project.
No, but I'm just within the words of this criterion.
Yeah, I know. I would agree.
You know, that, and then the lower level patios, in my opinion, with the 6 foot opaque wall, whether they're 5 feet or 13 feet away, that slider door or, you know, kitchen window or whatever's on that lower floor, I don't think that spacing 5 feet versus 13 feet away adversely affects privacy. Do you all agree with that?
I would agree.
Okay, so we're down to F and J. F, modification applies to property that cannot be developed in conformity with the provisions of this chapter due to physical circumstances. So that's the actual physical circumstances of this lot are causing development to require revisions or modifications or relief from code sections. I think we're having the most challenge with this one. And then with J, that does not create a situation where development will result in increase in the residential dwelling units. I agree with those. Those two, I feel as though the project as presented to us now within the appeal and within the DDO approved modifications, personally, in my opinion, doesn't meet the criteria for F and J.
I agree.
And without any background reasoning from the development services director who approved the DDO that would otherwise give more information or insight as to how they interpreted F and J within this DDO. I'm not sure I agree with the decision.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add regarding F, you know, I do think it would, with parking requirements and the setbacks for a 2-story structure, I do think it would be difficult to get 12 units on the site without any modification at all. It's a little subjective, I think, this particular point, but I think that's where we were going with this decision.
The physical characteristics of this lot do not make it undevelopable, correct?
It can be developed.
It can be developed. I don't know if I can ask you this question, but does your interpretation of F mean the lot does not, the physical characteristics of this lot are restricting it from being developed to the maximum allowable development, and that's the criteria being used.
Yeah, I would say for the proposal that was put before us for 12 units, which is allowable for the R2 zone and the acreage that they have on the site, it would be very difficult to develop it without any modifications of setbacks.
Correct. But I'm asking for maybe a determination that F, I'm reading that it cannot be developed in conformity with the provisions of this chapter. Does that statement say that it cannot be developed in conformity to its maximum allowed load? Or is it that it just cannot be developed? Because this is leading us directly into J. That's why I'm kind of teeing this up.
So the section that you're reading from is chapter or section 3. Which is the DDO section. I don't know if anybody has challenged that language before, whether or not that means applicable to DDO standards or to the entire chapter 23 Unified Development Code in general. I am not, unfortunately, I'm not the person to make that determination on that. I apologize.
I guess that same question is the concern for J too, correct? That, you know, this, if we did not provide relief from the setbacks, the number of dwelling units able to be put on this parcel would be less. So this relief does create a situation where the development will result in increased number of dwelling units that would occur if the development was built without this modification.
I'm
I
following
believe that's
your logic there, Chris, but I would argue, you know, these are 3-bedroom units. Could they develop 12 studios or 12 one-bedrooms? You know, they're accommodating a significant amount of parking because of the square footage of the units. And could they put that parking area back into dwelling units if they were working with a smaller footprint?
Yeah, they're self-imposed conditions, I guess, to,
Exactly.
yeah. They don't need to be 3 bedrooms.
They're trying to fit 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound sack, in my opinion. The site can't accommodate what they're trying to do without, you know, changing these setback requirements, and that isn't enough reason to do it.
So you get a big mess when you put 10 pounds in a 5-pound.
Yes, exactly.
You just got to heat it up and turn it into a liquid. So our interpretation of J is that this project does not meet or does create a situation where the development. No, because it could create. They could still fit 12 units in here, just not 12 big units.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
If we get rid of the square footage of non-residential buildings, I think what they're doing is adding square footage that would not be allowable without these modifications. It's not necessarily per dwelling unit. I still think that topic we are just on fits back into F. I don't think there's anything about this property, the actual property itself, that is not allowing them to develop this to its maximum dwelling unit allowable. The part that's holding them back and requiring this project to have the modifications that it's currently requesting are the size of the dwelling units being proposed, not the number of dwelling units. Is there agreement on that point?
I agree.
I agree as well.
Yes.
Is that enough of a provision for us to kick this and say we as a board believe this decision was not the correct decision to provide this DDO? Or are we at a point where it's a kind of middle of the road? There's parts of it we don't like, but overall we have that opportunity to say we like 1, 3, and 5 and not 2 and 4. Is there that option, or are we a blanket this objection to letter F is enough for us to say this entire decision was not what we believe is correct?
I mean, granted, we can't speak for the fire department or floodplain, but I would imagine that once they finish their reviews, those issues come into play also in addition to F that we're looking at. So looking at the holistic property, I think we are substantiated in saying that F does not apply here.
So what they ultimately got a DDO approval for, we're reducing the setbacks of the actual building facade from 14 to 5 and reducing the actual setback of the patios on the side to 10 foot to 1'6".
And additionally, the street setback as well.
And the front street, yeah, the main street south facade area. So as this board, do we have overall issues with the 5 foot, with the wall, the actual structures being as close to the property line as they are? Or is it the patios? Or just the overall development in general? Because right now I'm hearing we would like to reverse 1 through 4, or 2 through 5, and DDO 1 is the only one we don't necessarily have any. I mean, I don't think that affects much, in my opinion.
I would agree with that.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah, me too.
So are we willing to put in a modify or a straight reverse? I'd be willing to entertain both of those, I think.
Do we have both options? I thought we could either support the appeal or or not?
We can agree and uphold, we can modify, or we can full reverse the decision. So I believe modify gives us the opportunity to say we do not agree that 2 through 5 were the right decision, but we would allow 1 to remain. Correct, Maria? Nicholas, that's what modify within this
Yes.
means.
Yep.
I would agree that modify would be the correct course.
So if we were going to word this, Maria, I need a little direction on how to make this, or have our board craft a motion. If we use the words adjustment, modify the director's decision, was that where we would insert what we would modify, or is it subject to the following conditions language after the overall?
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, I think if the motion would say something like, the DRB recommends the Board of Adjustment to modify the PDST director's decision, finding that the DDO request item number 1, meets, is in compliance with these sections here. However, these requests through to 5 do not meet the criteria established by 311 1D 1, I believe it was F. And then in terms of conditions, it's up to the board if they want to establish conditions at this point.
Right. That's kind of where I was thinking that language would happen, is that we find the application of, number 1 or modification number 1 in compliance and number 2 through 5 not in compliance with the following section. I don't know if we have any conditions onto that finding. That would be my next point of topic. Do we have any special instructions or notes that we would like to pass on to it's a zoning administrator, right?
It would be to the Board of Adjustment, Mr.
The
Chair.
Board of Adjustment, sorry, our other one's zoning administrator. So if there's anything, conditions on this one would be if we want to give them any special things to look at, or I would say even thoughts on why we made the decision we did. That's where we add that language.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, the conditions would be attached to the item number 1 if you are recommending approval. If you were recommending approval with any additional conditions, then that would be the point to add those conditions. You can make observations, something for the Board of Adjustment to consider as they're making their decision. You can include those as just, observations for the Board of Adjustment.
Yes, we could add the language subject to the following conditions. If we had conditions for number 1 on approval, we could also change that language to with the following observations. Would that be acceptable?
That is correct, Yes, Mr. Chair.
Does someone want to take a swing at this one? I think we just laid out what we want to say.
What were you thinking for the conditions?
I'm not sure. I think if there are observations I'd want to put forth, I think it would be that we had an opposition to whatever that section number letter F for the setbacks, that maybe the design and that the design is really driving the need for the setbacks, not the number of dwelling units or the shape or physical characteristics of that property.
So the constraints being imposed are not by the property itself, but by the configuration of the applicant's design?
Correct. I think we probably need to have someone write out what that section is, because we're probably going to have to refer to it for that letter F. How to refer back to that letter F criteria we're looking at. You have a little one helping you out there, Nick?
Oh yeah,
All right.
a lot of help. A lot of help this morning.
That's right. We've all been there.
Citing is under what section?
Is it that 311(1)(d)(1), paragraph F? Yep.
Okay.
I think if no one else is ready to shoot off some language, I might muck my way through it here.
Please do.
Can we go?
You got it, Chris. You got it.
Yeah, can we go back to the actual language? Okay. Oh, the section was right in the. Oh, jeez. All right.
Right there. Okay, good.
Yeah, that 311(1)(d)(1) was actually in the language we need to use here. And we didn't have any other. That letter F was really the one that we're hung up on. We kind of cleared out all the rest.
Yeah.
Okay. Maria, you ready? Are you taking hand notes on this one, or are we just going to let the recording do it?
Yeah, Kyle here, one of the planners in the office, helping me, Nick, myself, and we'll have the recording as well, Mr. Chair.
I don't think it'll be long, but there's a lot of letters. Okay, I'm going to make the motion. The motion is the Design Review Board has reviewed the proposed design development option and recommends that the Board of Adjustments modify the director's decision to approve TP-DDO-0323-00001, finding the application modification number 1 to allow the front street perimeter yard setback to be reduced in compliance, and items 2 through 5 regarding the side perimeter setbacks to be reduced, not in compliance with the criteria established in UDC section 3.11.1.d, point 1 and 2, subject to the following observations, not necessarily conditions. We find UDC section 3.11.1.d, point 1, item F is not met by items 2 through 5 in the DDO approval. It is a condition of the design provided, not the actual physical site or conditions of the site requiring these modifications.
Well done. I'll second the motion.
Was that
Any
Ms.
further-
Bright seconded?
Yes.
Yes, I will second.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we shall vote. Those in approval?
Aye.
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 Aye for me. Noes? Hearing none, Maria, feel that's an unanimous vote by the board.
Thank you.
That was a long one. That was tough. Staff announcements?
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, there is one case coming in for the June 16th meeting. Is the property next to the Gibson's market in downtown on 6th Avenue. The applicant is coming in with a new land use and they're proposing exterior modifications to the buildings. So that will need to go through PRS and the DRB. So we're expecting they will come to you on June 16th. And just to give you a heads up, I don't know if you remember the 17-story apartment building that the DRB did a courtesy review for not too long ago for the corner, that would be the southeast corner of the I-10 frontage road and Broadway. They had filed for their development package, so they're moving forward with their proposal. So as soon as they get the first round of comments from their development package, they will file their design package and it will come to you. So maybe sometime in August, I'm guessing maybe July, we'll see. And that's all I have.
I hope that group took some of our comments into account. They had some challenges on that site, if I remember it correctly. I'd say we're done for today. The other comments?
Well, thank you so
statements?
much. Just wanted to get an idea if those present here think may be available for June 16th. I know it's in the middle of summer break, so if you guys can give me just a rough idea.
I should be available, Maria. My vacation time is early July this year.
I should be
I should be
available
here.
as well.
Oh, excellent. Miss Anthony?
Yeah, I should be around too.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful to know. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a
Thanks,
great
everyone.
weekend, everyone.
10:24. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.